All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about a huge shift that's happening in the investment world. For what feels like forever, the best deals, the private ones, were hidden behind these high walls. Well, those walls are finally starting to come down for everyday investors like you and me.
So, have you ever seen a company just explode in value? And by the time it finally hits the stock market, you're thinking, man, I totally missed the boat on that one. For decades, that feeling was completely justified. The highest growth opportunities were kept behind a very locked door. But here's the thing, that's all starting to change.
So here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with what I'm calling the private investment club. Then we'll look at the three big barriers that kept everyone else out. We'll get to the turning point, talk about the tech that's breaking everything open, and even look at a real-world example of how this new model works. Finally, we'll see how the barrier hasn't disappeared, it's just gotten a whole lot smarter. Okay, let's kick things off with why this is such a big deal. For the longest time, private markets really did operate like some exclusive club. And let's be honest, most of us were not on the guest list.
And this quote from Fortune really hits the nail on the head. See, the whole game is shifted. It used to be that companies would go public to get their big growth funding. Not anymore. Now they get that funding while they're still private. This means the lion's share of value creation, that explosive growth phase, happens before the company's ever available on a public stock exchange. If you're not in the club, you miss the biggest part of the ride.
So why was this door so heavily guarded? Well, it wasn't just one simple lock. It was a whole series of barriers that, whether it was on purpose or not, were designed to keep most people out. And this slide just lays out the divide perfectly. On one side, you've got the institutions. They get early access, things run smoothly, no problem. But then on the other side, for the regular retail investor, you're staring at a massive wall. We're talking huge minimum investments, your money being tied up for like a decade, and a total maze of legal rules. It was a completely different universe. So let's break down those three big locks. First up, you had regulatory barriers. Now, these laws were meant to protect people from super risky stuff, but in practice, they also just locked them out of the opportunity. Second, the capital barrier. The minimum buy-in was just so high you couldn't possibly diversify. And third was just the operational nightmare. Tons of paperwork, slow processes. It was enough to scare away even folks who qualified.
But, like with so many other industries, the story doesn't stop there. A really powerful combination of forces started to come together to forge a brand new key, one that could finally unlock this door. And as you can see from this timeline, this change really didn't happen overnight. Through the 90s and 2000s, the best opportunities were kind of quietly shifting from the public markets over to the private ones. But it's right now, in this decade, that the solution has finally started to catch up with the problem. And it's not just about some cool new app or a single piece of tech. It's about these two powerful forces working together: fintech innovation meeting an evolution in the rules. You can almost think of it like this. Technology built a totally new kind of car, and now the regulators are finally drawing the new roads for it to drive on.
Okay, so let's pop the hood and look at the engine that's driving all this change. The key piece of tech here is something called tokenization, but it's a word that gets thrown around and misunderstood a lot. So let's get really clear on what it actually means. This right here is probably the most important concept to get your head around. When we say tokenization, it's not about creating some new wild cryptocurrency. Not at all. It's much simpler. It's about taking a real, legally recognized asset, like a share in a startup, and creating a digital receipt for it on a super secure, transparent ledger. The investment is exactly the same. It's just the proof of ownership that gets a massive upgrade. And that upgrade brings three incredible benefits. First, fractional ownership. Remember that $1 million minimum? Well, tokenization can slice that up into tiny, affordable pieces. All of a sudden, it's actually accessible. Second, it makes the whole transaction process way faster and cheaper by automating it. And third, everyone can see the ownership records, which builds a whole new level of trust and transparency into the system. So what this tech does is it creates a whole new pathway. Instead of just one big gate that's either open or closed, it allows for a tiered approach, a system where investors can gradually get more access based on clear, verifiable steps. Let's take a look at how that actually works. Okay, so let's make this real. How does all this theory come together in the real world? We can look at a platform called IPO Genie, which is built on these exact principles. The whole goal here isn't just to tear down the walls completely. It's to replace that old, informal, it's all about who you know network with a transparent system that's based on what you verified. a system that anyone can potentially get into.
And here's the step-by-step of how that works. First, you create your own verified digital identity. Second, you go through all the necessary compliance checks. Third, you hold a specific platform token. And think of this more like a digital key or a membership card, not a separate investment. And that key unlocks a specific access tier for you. From there, you can see and invest in deals that match your level. It's a clear step-by-step path, not a giant brick wall. Now, this brings us to a really crucial point. Just because we're opening up access doesn't mean we're throwing safety out the window. Actually, it means we have to be even more thoughtful about how we protect investors. And the regulators are definitely paying attention to this shift. The message from bodies like the SEC is crystal clear. With more access comes a much bigger responsibility to educate and inform people. These are still high-risk investments, and that fact needs to be front and center. And this is really the key takeaway from all of this. We're not getting rid of the barrier entirely. We're just making it intelligent. Instead of a big, clumsy wall that blocks everybody, it's becoming a more sophisticated filter, one that manages access based on rules you can actually see and understand, all while making sure investors know the risks they're taking.
So this huge shift in tech and regulations is fundamentally changing who gets a seat at the table when it comes to wealth creation. That door isn't completely locked anymore. It's being fitted with a brand new, much smarter entry system. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Are we on the edge of a truly more inclusive, more democratic era of investing? The tools are finally here. Now we get to see how we all decide to use them.